I'd be walking down the hall. They had Joe in the emergency room walking down the hall, and I stopped and spoke a couple words to her, and that was about it. So that was the first occasion.
The way I met Mark Teresa,
Through Charles.
the Clausers lived next door, and they had a daughter, who had a daughter, and his name was Stryker. And Mark Teresa and Betty Stryker were good friends because they were cousins. And so when she would come over every summer and spend a week, and that's how I met Mark Teresa, while she was there on vacation for a week. And so anyhow, she dated, I think, Sam or Charles first.
Me.
Then she dated me, and then it lingered on, and we finally got married after 2 years.
Jenny was in nurses training, and a friend of mine was dating a nurse, a student nurse up there, and he said, I want to get you a date with the cute little girl up there, and I said, that's fine. So when I went up, had a date with Jenny, and we dated after that forever.
And 6 kids.
Sometimes when she was on call, I'd pick up some fried chicken, take it up there, and we'd sit in the living room and play cards and that kind of stuff. So it's been a nice 56 years, and of course Aaron will be married 56 years in April. So that's a long time to be married. Yeah.
Talking about that, when I got married Aunt Betty's house, or my sister Betty's house, and the ribeye and all came right there. I got married right in her house. Charles was my best man.
Yes, so still
I
am.
don't think Nikki was Mark Teresa's maid of honor. And then Mark Teresa's mother and daddy was there, and one of Mark Teresa's mother's friends was also there. And then we went on our honeymoon and went over to visit Neoma, spent a day or two with her, and we was down in Washington, spent a day there, just rode here and there, different places. But that's a long time ago.
And then in 1941, when the draft came on, I think, if I'm correct, Joe decided that he was going into service. Is that right, Sam?
No.
Oh, excuse me.
We were both.
He didn't want to be drafted.
No, we were both drafted, Charles. We were both drafted. He went in. I did get an extension for six months, and went in March to close a business down in Front Royal. But Joe went in September. I went in March of '42. He went in '41. We both had our draft cards. I can show it to you. I know you believe you're.
I still got mine.
Yeah.
Well, but the story I like to tell is better. Because Joe decided to go in, because back then you went in, you served a year. So Joe went in, figured that, well, by the time his year was up, then Sam would go in, and Irv, and then me, and then Aaron. But as it turned out, we all five ended up in there. I like that story a whole lot better.
Another thing I can remember people telling when we first come out of the service, Fritzy would have a great big sign out in front of our house here on Valley Avenue. And welcome home. Who came first? You? Did you come home first?
1945, the Armistice Day of 1945.
And then Joe came second?
And the sign Fritzy has, well, go back in for 3 more years.
Well, that's the way they did it. When I got home, there was a big sign, welcome home here, whatever. So I can remember that. We used to have some big times there on Valley Avenue.
Yes, we did.
I mean, we built a little penthouse over top of the garage. And Joe and I stayed in the penthouse. And we were doing a little drinking back in those days. And like Charles said, every morning we'd get up, Joe would take a drink. Well, I had to take one too, you know. But I was pretty well loaded that one night, and I had to pee. And anyhow, we had a steps that went up about 10 steps. It's about 10 foot high, I'd say. And we had made a rack to put our clothes on, because we didn't have a closet or anything, a little penthouse we made. And had to take the top rail off of that lattice work there, the banisters, to get that thing in, but we never put it back on. So I said to Joe the next day, I said, Joe, you know something? He said, what's that? I said, I think I fell off that goddamn porch. He said, what are you talking about? I said, I'm telling you, I fell off that porch. And sure enough, I must have did a complete flip, where there was both of my feet print right there in the grass where I hit that thing. I didn't have any shoes on, you know, and the weather was warm. But
Last
And to this
time,
very day, I couldn't tell you whether I voted or not.
last time you told that story, it was snowing.
It did?
Yeah,
It was
we should
snowing.
make up your mind,
You were
yeah.
drunk enough you didn't remember that, but it
And
was
you,
snowing.
and you knew you voided because there was some stuff.
You wrote your name
Green
in the,
stuff.
in the snow.
But he could only spell the AA.
Oh, man.
When you were young men, you know, in school and around town, of course, nowadays, people can't have disagreements without somebody getting knifed or shot. But in your day, I imagine a lot of things were settled by going out back and seeing who was a better man. Did you all fight each other, or
We had a few little rounds.
The only real fight I can remember in Winchester was Joe, and we had a fellow around a grocery store up near one of our scrap yards on Kent Street. He by the name of Freeze, and somebody came running in our place on Baker Street and said, "Joe's in an awful fight up there." So a couple of us went up, and Joe had this guy on the ground. He was only maybe 17 years old, beating the holy hell out of him. And finally they broke it up, and the guy went in. He had a bloody nose and a black eye. And I said, "What happened, Joe?" He said, "Well, that guy said that Hitler was going to get all the Jews, including us." And that was about all Joe needed to beat the dickens out of that guy. But the other experience that I had was, when Joe and I were in the National Guard, we used to go to Virginia Beach. And Joe was taking the radio out of the captain's car, Captain Hollis, and the trunk fell down on his thumb. Well, we had these tents and had these cots we used to sleep on, and our mess kits. And Joe and I were in the same tent. It ended up I had to wash all his mess kits, had to take care of all his clothes and everything. We were taking a shower one day, and he had this, what the men use someplace else on their thumb.
You mean a condom?
The condom, thank you. And anyhow, this guy had said something to Joe about, well, you know, is that what you use on your lady, or something like that. Well, he wanted to fight Joe. Of course, Joe couldn't fight, so what happened? The guy must have been about 6'8". And anyway, he and I got in a fight, and it was pretty rough for a while. And thank God, Red Baker came by and broke it up. I thought he was going to choke me. I broke his nose. He went to the hospital, but all because I tried to protect my poor brother. And I ended up washing his clothes, taking his mess kit, and you know, that's what brothers are for.
And then you found out his son wasn't even hurt.
I recall when I was in high school, they had one of the man teachers, I think his name was Mr. Cole. Anyhow, this young little fellow was sort of a crippled boy, and he worked to use crutches, but he had a couple of rubber bands around his arm. And that teacher said to him up there, and I took that rubber band and snapped that thing, and the blood come out of there. When that did it, the blood come out of me. I took those rubber bands and I put them around my arm. I said, "Pull them off of my hand." And he started, and I popped him. I got 2 weeks out of it.
Your brother Charles was expelled too, so you know.
Charles went home and told Mother, and he said, "Now you go up there and you talk to Mr. Qualls and get him back in school." Well, they did let me almost stay off for a week. Well, I was having a heck of a good time. I was off.
Okay.
Well, I guess we better talk about it a little bit while we were in the service.
Please do.
Yeah. Sam, you've got the worst stories, so go ahead.
Well, I've got some good ones too.
I
Anyway,
know, but
Joe
they're
and I-
bad.
Joe and I went over in the same convoy and ended up in England, and we were there for 3 months. They made MPs out of us at the time. We went from there to into Paris, and through Paris to Luxembourg and into Germany. And I remember we stayed at a place called Romaskirch in Germany, and it was like a jam factory, and they had a 3-story home there. And I recall very vividly that is where, when we got the word that President Roosevelt had passed away at that time. And but it had this 3-story house, and it was cold as the dickens, and we had to build slit trenches in it when to go to John or something. Well, I was on the 3rd story, and I used to wear this little army knit hat on. Well, when I had to go, all I did was open that 3rd story window, and that's where, you know, the void right out of the window. It was a lot more convenient. But anyhow, we went on and got into Germany, and stayed at a place called Mulheim, and that we were there when the war ended in Germany. And Marty had asked, had I ever seen any concentration camps? And no, we had not, but we did have an occasion where they discovered this one mass grave, 122 people, men, women, and children, and our duties were they put us on guard duty there while the civilians dug up the people, put them in these white bags, and that's the only thing I can remember that certainly was very distasteful. And I was there when in Germany when the war ended. Then I got a 3-day pass. I knew Joe was in Paris, and I got a pass to go. We rode on these 6x6 trucks, and well, it was 150 miles. And are we doing all right? And anyway, 150 miles, and we went in, and the first time we drove in a Jeep, this lieutenant and another fellow. I knew Joe was in a hospital, train 7, and we located the train and asked somebody, was Sergeant Zuckerman here? And he said, oh yes, and when he came out, of course, Joe and I were happy to see each other, we hugged each other, and I noticed Joe had his gas mask on. I said, what's the story in the gas mask? He said, well, Lieutenant, can y'all spend the night? Of course, they had sheets on the train and everything. This hospital train would go up the front and bring back not only the wounded Americans, but they would bring back the Germans too, for medical attention. And so he said, come on with me, and we went up to this little French restaurant and went in, walked through it, and there was a door, and Joe knocked on the door, and he spoke very good French at that time, and went in, and he opened the gas mask, and he had a thing of coffee, and had candy, had cigarettes and everything. We walked out of there with 3 bottles of cognac. So that was a pretty good experience for it too, but I did have an occasion to meet with him a couple other times, and I remember we spending the night there. He stayed in the chateau, and we went to breakfast and came out and picked up the newspaper and said Americans had dropped an atomic bomb. Well, we didn't know anything about that, and from there we went to Reims, France, in a tent city, and all our equipment went to the Pacific, and we were going to Marseille to catch our ship home, and on the way to Marseille, they had dropped the second atomic bomb, and of course the war was over there in Japan, and they kept us there for 3 weeks, and sent us home on this, it was a sea pike, but the time I got home, the dog was a sea cute. I really got sick for 8 or 9 days on that thing, but it was great experience. I have no regrets about it at all. It was wonderful.
Well, the experience I had happened in Shanghai, China. I could go home. The war was over. I could have gone home, but my dear friend Bob Pershing, who were still close friends, he was one they had to pick to take the ship to Japan and turn it over to the Japanese, because we were going out picking up these Japs, and they were all diseased, and they decided it wasn't good for the Americans to get these diseases. So I said, well, if he's going to stay, I'd volunteer to stay with him. Well, we did, and we got back. They put him aboard another ship, and they put me on what they call a PSC. It's a wooden craft that went up and down the Yangtze River, putting pilots on and off these big ships to run them up the Yangtze River. And when I got aboard that ship, the guy said, your name is Zuckerman? I said, yeah. He said, why? He said, well, there's a family of Zuckermans that have a beautiful place there in Shanghai. He said, they got a nice bar, food and everything. He said, and their name is Zuckerman. I said, you're kidding. He said, no. So when I go ashore, we'll take it. So we came back in. We'd go out 10 days, come in for 10 days. Sure enough, I went in there, and I had a bracelet on. I had my name right on it. I had made it out of stainless steel. And, well, they just went crazy. I tell you, I couldn't buy a drink. I couldn't buy anything. They treated me like a king. And hell, I was only 18 years old. Maybe I'd turned 19. And they had 5 daughters. And 3 of them were married. One got married when I was there, and I went to the wedding. I had to close the place down. Then they had one was my age, and she was a beauty. And they'd give me money to take her to the movies and this and that. And finally, the word got that I was able to go home. So they put me on what I call a floating hotel. And so I stayed there, and I'd go over to shore and go into the restaurant and have a big time, you know. And I did a little bouncing for them. They had a lot of these British boys that come in, the sailors come in and get a little rough, you know, and I have to straighten them out. But anyhow, they found that this boatswain's mate he was quite a boozer. He said, go and stay over there. They'll stay over there 3 or 4 days. He said, I won't call the roster. I'll never call your names. But I'd always take him back some good old vodka, good old Russian vodka, and he liked that. So finally, he sent word over there to come back that the ship was going to be coming in to send us home. Well, they had a party for him. They closed the place down, and I'm telling you, it was second to none. It was something else. And I kissed everybody goodbye, and I got pictures of all of them at home. And so got back aboard to this we call the floating hotel, waiting for the ship to come in. Well, it did, and they called everybody's name in alphabetical order. They never called my name. And I went up to the yeoman to find out what was going on, and he looked up there. By mistake, they just left me off the list, and the ship was to capacity. They couldn't put me on it. Now, oh Lord, well, they gave me 3 or 4 bottles of vodka to bring home to my daddy. So finally, I got into one of those bottles one day. The guy, this sailor told me, he said, "Go on over there." I said, "Man, they had a big party for me. I can't do that." So finally, I got in one of those bottles one day, and I had a snoot full. A little old sampan came by there, and the Chinaman, I said, "Come over here." And he took me, I said, "Take me ashore." So he did. And I tell you, I walked in that door, the place went crazy again. I told him what had happened. And it was another 4 or 5 weeks before I did get home. I had a ball. I really had a ball. It's quite an adventure. It really was.
The thing he's not telling you, he's talking about these 5 sisters, and 3 of them are married. I'm not going to tell you what it did to all 5 of them.
Do a thing. What are you talking about?
Well, let's see. I didn't really do a whole lot in the service. When I went in, they put us on a train after it had been at camp. What was the name of that camp? I don't have a memory. Anyhow, and it was winter, January. I went in January, and they put us on a train. We're traveling down the road. Didn't have any idea where we're going. We get to Miami, hot as heck. Got all these winter clothes on, and they put us up in the hotel. And I was assigned to be a drill instructor, so that's where I took my drill instructor's whatever.
Basic training?
Well, that's where I learned. Yeah, I took basic training and became a drill instructor there. And then I was assigned to Miami Beach. And the worst part of that is we had to stay in a damn hotel. And just 2 of us to a room. But that was the start of my service. And the worst time I had was in Gulfport, Mississippi. And we did train people down there. And the mosquitoes were so bad that in the morning we'd wear our raincoats and our mosquito netting to go to breakfast. And it was so bad, we had a couple of guys that only weighed 120 pounds. We never did know what happened to them. The damn mosquitoes must have carried them away. I'm not, you go ahead and laugh. They were big. But that was my worst experience, I guess, in the service.
Well, I'm gonna, just a couple more questions because we're getting a little short on time, but
What are you talking about? We didn't start at 3 o'clock. You said it's a 2-hour tape.
you're the ones hurrying me up all the time.
Oh, excuse me.
You always act like this?
Huh?
I'd like for you guys to talk about Uncle Irvin, because he passed when most of us were so young, and he passed at such a young age, and
50 years old.
especially for Sandy and her kids who really never got a chance to know him.
1972.
Well, I guess in the later years, I was probably as close to Irv as anybody. He did work with Royal. Irv was quite an athlete. He was a good basketball player. He was an excellent softball player. When he was living in Front Royal, he played on the team. And I remember Rosie was only 2 years old. And we used to put her in the baby carriage and go down to Bing Crosby Stadium and watch him play. He was excellent. And Irv was probably one of the, no feelings meant, but he was probably one of the smartest boys in the family. He was chosen the best looking boy in his high school class, along with Kitty Baker's a girl. And but he worked in Front Royal, and for a few years he decided he wanted to move to Florida. And
Yeah, but why did he want to move to Florida?
well, we can't go into the married life, I guess. I don't know anyhow.
Why not?
Is that the reason you asked the question?
Yeah, because he was married to our
Yeah.
stepmother's daughter.
Well,
Tuba?
Yeah. Oh,
Toby.
anyhow,
Toby.
he moved to Florida. He was down there for a few years, and Bobby and I did visit with him a couple times, and he'd come back to Front Royal and visit. But then when he got cancer, he finally took a job. He was at Duke University down there where he had a surgery. He had cancer of the prostate. In those days, they didn't have the PSA. Now the means of determining advanced cancer people. He had surgery. He finally went to work for a scrap company down in Goldsboro, Florida, and North Carolina. And they thought he had been cured, and evidently it came back, and it was getting worse. So he came back to Front Royal, and he lived with me for a while. And he was very, very ill. I remember that I would get up. He was in the bedroom. I'd get up at night. He was complaining about his knees hurting and everything. And then he and Jean finally got an apartment in Front Royal, and on a couple occasions, Bob and I had to go over there and help him out of the bathroom and some other things. But I do recall one day when he was at my house, I was painting some of the handrails, and I noticed he was sitting on the back patio, and I noticed he had left, and he came back and he smiled. I said, what's the matter? He said, I just walked all the way down to the road and back again by myself. But he got worse, and he had to go back to Duke, and I remember they chartered a small plane, and they made a temporary stretcher and bed inside that plane, and I flew him back down to Goldsboro, and Gene met us here, and I flew back with him on that plane. But he was a sick man. He went from a fantastic, healthy man to somebody that you had to carry around, which was very, very difficult.
Didn't weigh much when he died.
Well, when he was ready to come back from Duke, and they knew they couldn't do anything else for him, I went down. I had a station wagon, and I bought one of these inflatable mattresses, and of course it would have just cost too much money to bring him back in an ambulance. So I put him in back of that car, and that's a 6-hour trip at least. Well, and I'd stop, and then he couldn't get out, and I'd get him something to drink. But by the time we got to Winchester, the damn thing had deflated. He didn't complain about it, didn't say anything about it at all. And they were living in the apartment then, and I picked him up and carried him in the apartment. He couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds. And as I tell everybody, and this may not be a good thing to say, but if he'd have died 6 months earlier, the sad thing was that his mind was great. I mean, he knew exactly what was going on. But it was terrible for him. It was terrible for the family.
Well, he passed away in the Front Royal Hospital,
Yeah.
and
Right.
Betty and Naomi and I were there at the time. And,
I was there too.
It was, Charles was probably there too. He was a sick man. It was a sad thing to see, but that happens unfortunately in many families, and it was difficult.
We've really been lucky when you think about it. As long as we've lived, I mean, Joe and Naomi were both 84, I think, when they died, and Betty will be 90.
Naomi was 86.
Was she? Betty will be 90. Sam was just 84, and Aaron will be 78 on April the 8th, and I was 80 on February the 5th. So that's not bad, when you think about it.
Well, we're talking about the 8 children in the family, and I know that we moved 8 different times. Every time we had a new child in the family, we'd have to move.
We couldn't pay the rent.
On one occasion, that Dad didn't know what we had to go get him to show him where he moved to. But Naomi was a special lady. I remember on Fairmont Avenue, I used to walk to school with her, and it was cold winter. In the wintertime, I put a lot of water on my hair, and my hair would freeze. But then I had this home in Hawthorne Drive in Winchester. Naomi used to come down and spend some time with me, and she loved to walk. We walked around the block many times. And when I had my prostate removed in 15, 16 years ago, I was living in an apartment. I said, call her. I said, could you come down and spend a week? And she did. It was just wonderful. I mean, it just couldn't have been any better. And, I always thanked her for that. So she was
A lovely lady. She really
wonderful
was.
person.
Well, Betty left Winchester right after she graduated. And, I'm 10 years younger, and Aaron's 12 years younger than Betty. So we really didn't get to know her, although, she was like a mother to us, and diapers and everything. And I don't remember her doing that, but she said she did. But Naomi stayed around Winchester for a while and worked for a milling company in Winchester. I guess she didn't leave till, I guess she got married, did she?
Probably
But
not.
she was there in Winchester for.
And Fritzy stayed with us when
And
we
Fritz
first,
stayed, yeah.
she stayed with us when we got out of
Yeah.
service.
Yeah, she was there.
For a long time, and she did a wonderful job with the
Well,
kids, too.
she would have stayed longer, but some people thought maybe she ought to go to a house where they take care of people that are mentally disarranged.
Well, she always
She's
said.
always been a nut.
No, she's always
Oh.
said, when you got a letter from her, she said, Dad's crazy Fritz, or
Yeah.
something like
Yeah.
that, so anyhow.
Collectively or individually, what are your best and what are your worst memories in your lives?
Best, of course, being raised in a wonderful family, I guess, it would just, I tell people many, many times that driving through Winchester, they look, all these new buildings and everything, said, Marty, if we just go back to the Model A Ford and not all this traffic and everything, I said, they were absolutely wonderful days. I mean, we had a wonderful family, and we didn't have a lot, we always enjoyed life very much, but I think the saddest days, actually three. And one was, of course, when Mother passed away. I was at Camp Pickett, and I told you, I came home 2 weeks before she passed away and gave her money to get her hair done. And I drove from Camp Pickett. I had a 1939 DeSoto, I think, whatever.
Dodge.
Dodge, I think it was a DeSoto.
It was
But
a Dodge.
anyway, drove home, and I don't ever remember coming up that highway at all. That was very difficult, and we spoke about Irv. That was, another very, very bad time. I didn't mention this before, and I'll tell you why. We had taped this before, but I wasn't sure I could handle this. But anyway, I think the most difficult time, 7 years ago, my daughter Rosie called me from the office, and I was home at lunch, and she said she wasn't feeling well. And I went down, and when I saw her, she was just leaning over in a chair, and she was in perfect health all the time. And then I found it later on the floor, and I called 911, and she had some kind of blockage at 47 years old, and she took her to the hospital, and she passed away then. And that is a time I hope nobody in our family will ever have to experience something like that.
I hope you're right.
Oh, you're right, yeah.
So that's my worst time.
I think my worst time was when I got the telegram about Mom, when I was overseas. I was 18 then, I guess, yeah. And that was one of my worst times. Other than that, Irvin passing away, and even with Sam, with Rosie, so all of it was bad times. But good times, it's like you say, with get together, man, we used to sing. Betty played the piano, and the neighbors would come over and just to listen to us sing. We all had pretty good voices.
It's
Yeah.
changed just a little
Back then we
bit.
did.
Then,
Back then we did. We sort of lost a little bit now. But we used to get together and play. She'd play the piano. And of course, I played the harmonica for years and still do. And we had a back porch upstairs on the house on Valley Avenue, and I used to sleep on that back porch in the warm weather. I think it was screened in, I believe.
Well, it was because you never took a bath, maybe.
But I used to play the harmonica, and the people next door would give me one of those, Kitty, please. Anyhow,
I got some.
You've been blowing your nose on yours.
I've already blown my nose on it. Is there two of them there? Did you get one, Sam?
he got one. He got one.
And, okay, are you finished?
Yeah, I think so.
I forget what you said.
I forgot too.
Well, like them, those are probably the three saddest days in our life. And of course, another sad day was when Jenny's mother passed away, and also her father. And her father was 79, her mother was 83. And I always told people that I fell in love with Jenny's mother first. We used to go down there, and
She was a sweetheart.
and then it took me about, I guess, 55 years to fall in love with Jenny. I'm just kidding, Jenny. No, I didn't realize she was sitting out there. And that's, of course, that's one of the best things that ever happened in my life, and there's 6 kids and grandchildren. And I always tell people that the two greatest things our parents ever did for us was when they came from Russia and then when they came to Winchester.
well, I mentioned Dad again, we haven't talked about him much, but Dad was sick for quite a while too. He had a colostomy, and I know we used to take turns coming over to take care of him. Like Aaron said, we'd play cards. he'd always forget about how sick he was when he played cards. It was a wonderful thing for that.
Yeah.
And he was sick for a long time, but I remember going with him to the hospital in the ambulance. When he got there, he had to tell some kind of joke to the nurses. He never, he always had something funny to say. And hey, the guy was 86 years old, and that's really getting up there. So we're going to complain about that. So I hope I can make it.
Well, we think back, we thought 86 was old, and here's
I
Sam.
thought 84 was old.
Well, and Sam's 84 now, but it's a whole cycle, I mean, let's face it, we're from one generation, you are from the next one, and you're going to be going through the same thing. And we don't know how many of us are going to be left in 10 years.